Hi, this is Jennifer Wilson, and this is my presentation on the book that I read and reviewed, which is Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo, or Why Aid is Not Working and How There's a Better Way for Africa. She is more of a business, not aid person, as you could probably tell from the title. She doesn't feel that aid is good for Africa in particular. She does discuss how aid started in the Bretton Woods of New Hampshire in 1944 and how it was created as a way to rebuild Europe. And it came with a time limit and stipulations that the countries had to adhere to. She does admit that it had great success. And then because of that success, there was more of a push for aid as the decades went on. Next would be the Marshall Plan in the 50s, the push for industrialization in the 60s, and poverty reduction in the 70s and on. And it's, according to Moyo especially, it's become big business and very popular to want to help the poor in other regions of the world, especially on the part of rich countries. However, according to Moyo, she says that aid to Africa is not only unhelpful but detrimental and is harming the people of Africa. She says that the aid to poor people has reached over $2 trillion over the past 50 years. And all of that money has flowed from the richer nations to Africa. Yet despite it becoming popular for people to want to give aid, politicians will speak out about how we need to give more money. Celebrities will host events and raise money, and it's become a big thing. But yet millions of Africans are in poverty today because of aid, is her argument. So not only, like I said, is it not helpful, but aid can be detrimental in her view. Moyle's take on it is that it's difficult, and she gives reasons, which are, I believe, valid reasons, actually, that it cannot be a good thing sometimes. One of the big issues is the corruption of governments. So all of this, like billions and trillions of dollars are flowing into these countries with corrupt regimes, and the money isn't being used for the people. It's being hoarded at the top. Sounds kind of familiar. By certain people, and then they use it for personal gain. So all this altruistic reasons that people may want to give money to Africa to help people, it's not actually going to the people. It's being used for leaders' wives to go on spending sprees at Harrods in London, or to fly private jets for their children to go to weddings, things like that. And then the infrastructure programs that are said to be part of the reason that the aid is there in the first place for some of these things, it goes to useless projects or projects that would benefit leaders or their families or their friends. So that's not helpful at all. She says part of the problem is aid organizations and governments having personal reasons for doing it, so they keep pushing more and more aid to benefit whether it's a political ambition or personal reasons. The foundation of functioning governments and infrastructure isn't there in some of these countries. And like I said, part of the money that's maybe meant to go to some of these improvements has not been done. So that's a big problem because, like I said, the foundation isn't there. So even if you had a better functioning government, if you don't have the infrastructure and it's not completely a good functioning government, you're going to have issues dispersing the money to the people that need it the most. She also discusses how 50% of the continent remains under non-democratic rule. So some of the aid that is given to Africa comes with some stipulations and maybe a push from Western countries such as the US to promote democracy worldwide. But yet 50% remains under non-democratic rule, which some may find as a problem, although Moyle does not see it as significant as a problem. And actually, she does describe how to benefit Africa, there perhaps should be a benevolent dictator, is how she describes it, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. Maybe I'm just too used to the United States, but I feel like true democracy could be good, and I don't see ever a time when there could be a benevolent dictator. Just like it just doesn't seem like that's a possibility to me. So there's also other things that are issues. So another of the big issues, besides the ones that I just discussed, is the aid itself from organizations like the World Bank and the IMF. So they're giving large sums of money to Africa, but a lot of times it's just freely given with no strings attached. They might have stipulations that they say they want on it, but they don't enforce them, which is a huge problem. So there's actually been instances with outright corruption that was rewarded. I discussed this in the other class, but there was, I think it was in the 70s, one of the people who worked for the IMF, his name was Blumenthal, he sent out a memo, this scathing memo that went on about the corruption in the government of Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And it was this like very known memo. Yet, despite knowing this and knowing that he was telling them directly, someone who worked on the ground and saw the corruption firsthand, was telling them about the corruption firsthand. Despite hearing this, and him telling them that the money was definitely not going to the people in any way, shape, or form, the IMF decided to give the largest loan of any African nation at the time after the fact. So it seems like they just don't care. They just want to just keep pumping out money to Africa with no regards as to any effectiveness of it. And I can definitely see that as a possibility, because aid can be helpful, I think. And Moyle herself, even though she's very much against aid for Africa, she has pointed out that at least 12 countries have improved economically. Mostly Asian countries, but they have, because they didn't have the pre-existing issues with corruption in the government, red tape, infrastructure, things like that. So aid can be helpful. It definitely can. But maybe not in Africa the way it is now. She also discusses the uses, like it's possible to get investors to bring more money to Africa in a better way than just pumping out money and giving it to people without regard to what happens with the money or if it actually gets to the people. She discusses things like microloans, funding of bonds, foreign direct investments, which a company comes in and they basically own pieces of the companies, they invest in it in Africa. But as she points out, once again, bringing it back to the infrastructure issue, doing business, as she calls it, is a nightmare in Africa. Despite the proximity to other countries, like say Europe, for example, I mean Morocco and Spain are right there next to each other. Despite that and the larger distance between places like Asia and other countries, people prefer to do business in Asia with Asian countries instead of African countries because not only of the lack of infrastructure, making it more expensive to export items, but also there's a hefty amount of red tape involved, again, bringing that back to the corruption of the area. So you might wonder why aid might continue and what could be done about that. Well, in Moyle's view, aid continues for political reasons. Politicians, it's beneficial for them to bring about the plight of Africans as a way to make themselves look good, I guess. At least that's what I got from that. And then also for personal reasons, because the IMF and the World Bank employ lots of people and they have budgets and quotas they're supposed to meet. I mean, it's a business for them. It's not just an aid organization. People are making money. And so that can be a reason as well why they keep pushing for aid and aren't too concerned with any ramifications of where it goes. So her ideas, she comes up with a 3-part plan. The first is to cut off funding. Just cut off all aid. She doesn't really give a time limit, but she does say that it should be cut off completely. Like, just make a phone call and give the leaders of the countries a time and saying, this you have 5 years basically, or whatever time limit they decide upon. So you have this 5 years, and in 5 years there's no more aid. Figure it out, basically. One thing that I found kind of strange though is she makes the assumption that people wouldn't die or suffer from the just complete cutoff of aid, that they would just figure it out. But she also admits that they've been dependent upon aid for so long, so it's not really based on a whole lot of facts, I don't feel like. But her second part of the plan is lending, so finding investors from abroad. And she is also, another of my problems though is she assumes that there wouldn't be any corruption with lending. Like, lenders would just be like, you know what, you're corrupt, I'm not going to keep giving you money. But I don't know that that's necessarily true. So after increasing lending and getting foreign investors, her third approach would be strengthening of the institutions with accountabilities, and making sure there's more transparency, which I think would be a really, really good thing, actually. I think that's part of the problem, actually, is that there's no accountability. It's all very secretive, I guess, as far as some of the aid organizations go, like IMF and World Bank with their lending. So I believe the third one especially would do well. I don't know necessarily that I would think to cut off aid completely. I feel that there should be more, it should be fixed, basically. So that brings me to my questions. So question 1, do you believe aid is as big of a problem as Moyle describes with what I've just told you? Number 2 is, do you think we need to cut aid off, fix the programs, or something different? My personal view, like I said, is fix the aid programs themselves, maybe not cut them off completely all at one time. All right. Thank you for listening.